Welcome to Relatively Famous, the podcast where we interview relatives of famous people. My name's Chip White, and I'm the brother of Vanna White of Wheel of Fortune. And on today's episode, we have the brother of actor-producer Jessie Borrego, who is known for the TV series Fame and the movie Blood In, Blood Out. Today is James Borrego.
Relatively Famous podcast with Chip White.
James, welcome to the show. I'm super excited to have you here. You're a San Antonio native. I've just moved to San Antonio. We do the podcast out of here. And I hear through the grapevine that your brother's probably one of the most famous people in town.
He gets around. It's a small town if you think about San Antonio. But thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm excited about it. I don't know a lot about your brother because I do remember the TV show Fame, because that was kind of in my youth.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about your relationship with the family, and then we're going to jump into who you are, because it's always about who the guest is.
Oh, I've been waiting for this moment all my life. Well, so I'm the youngest of my parents' first marriages, right? So I got an older sister, and then there's Jessie in the middle, and then there's me, was the youngest. And like I said, I'm 4 or 5 years younger than my older siblings. I just didn't realize that when I was younger. I always thought I was just a couple of years younger than them. But 4 or 5 years is a pretty big. It's a pretty big distance, right, from the age range. So, but I always noticed that they were so much more advanced in me than, especially in, my father was a musician, so everybody was always singing and dancing and performing, and I just was not naturally built for that. And my brother and my sister were. So I always felt kind of behind the curve in that sense, that they were just more experienced and talented than I was, right? Yeah. So but growing up, it was just a family of musicians, so we watched my dad play a lot, practice a lot, and then watching him perform was just amazing. And kind of naturally, all of us kind of were inclined to gravitate towards performing music, right? But I never really took music formally. I always banged on my drums when I was a kid, banged on the table, get in trouble, hitting the pencils at school, that thing, but never really took music seriously until I got older.
So you're the drummer in the family.
I'm the drummer in the family. I have natural rhythm. My sister always said, you're the better dancer between me and my brother. I know. But she's the one that said she goes, you're always the better dancer. I do remember that my brother wasn't naturally, like dancing was not natural to him. He could sing, but dancing wasn't. He always had to work at it. And my sister, like I said, she always said, you were the better dancer. But yeah, normal childhood. Our parents got divorced, and that was a big deal. Because all of a sudden it was like we were raised by a single mother, and we kind of left on our own, and we kept ourselves entertained. I mean, we were always doing something, either doing magic tricks, performing magic, or putting on shows. We were always into the talent shows. And, the teachers were always recruiting us to be in the talent shows because we were, naturally built for that, But like I said, I wasn't the natural like that. It wasn't until later that I, formally got into it. But
you were saying earlier at lunch that it comes natural kind of in your family because certainly the grandmother and your dad he's a pretty well-known musician.
Yeah. So my grandmother was always playing music, and she was always singing, and she was always introducing us to different types of music, Cuban music, Argentine music, tangos, that kind of stuff. She just loved it. We'd be going down the street, and she'd just pull over and buy a record, and it was some kind of a jazz performance, the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. She would just get these ideas, and she'd buy the records, and next thing you know, we were listening to the music and dancing in front of the record player. So my father was a conjunto musician, and anybody that's from San Antonio knows that conjunto music is traditionally from San Antonio. It's the two worlds, the German, Czech immigrants colliding with the Mexican natives that were here and creating a new genre. And so conjunto music, if you listen to it, it's got polka roots, and it's got a lot of the waltzes and all of those connections. So a lot of people don't know that about San Antonio, that we are truly the root music here is conjunto. Just like jazz is in New Orleans, or the blues in Kansas City, San Antonio has its own unique sound. So my father was an accordion player, played button accordion, which is a diatonic scale, and it requires a certain amount of skill to agility to be able to play that. But for him, it was natural, and I didn't find out later till my grandmother said, your father would go into the back room and just play to records for hours and hours, and he learned to, he did not, and most conjunto musicians are never there's no formal training. Right. It's a very informal music. So you only learn by listening. You never see a conjunto musician sight reading, it's just, so, we were just, like I said, we were raised in that type of environment. There was lots of music. Always was a big influence in all our lives. And like I said, it wasn't just conjunto music. It was all kinds of varieties. So,
yeah. Music was big in our house. My mother had a record player, and it was, where I grew up, it's called beach music, which is old R&B. Yeah. And being the youngest, I'm younger than my sister, you get left out on certain things. There is a competitiveness, though, that kind of kicks in. Being the younger, you want to prove yourself. And I know you talked about you weren't the best singer, but there was a sport that you seemed to excel where the family didn't, right?
Yeah. So it was. It's funny because so then we grew up, and we started playing sports, right? And all of us are kind of like naturally athletic, right? I mean, we didn't grow up with size or anything like that, but if we practice something like baseball or basketball or any of those sports, we could get pretty good at it. Yeah. My sister was a volleyball player, and she was a track runner, and she could play basketball. So she was really gifted, a three sport athlete, in high school. And so when we went to high school, everybody knew us because of my sister. And the coaches would be like, I hope you're, as good as your sister. I'm like, oh my God, here too, please. But my brother thought he was pretty good at basketball too. And I just remember that he wasn't really that good. And he tried out for the team, and he didn't make it, man. I just remember him being super disappointed because he thought he was just going to be able to, like everything else, walk on and, knock it out of the park, so to speak. So then it was my turn. 3 years later, I tried out for the basketball team, and I thought I was, okay. And, I made the team. And I made varsity the first year, I was like, what? And I was like, I finally bested him at something. Finally, one thing. Basketball, Hey. And then, even there at that age, he started competing against me, and he would always be challenging me to one-on-ones. I'd be like, dude, physically, I started getting bigger than him. He's generally a small, kind of slender guy. At that age, I was becoming more, I had more muscle, and so I could kind of rough him up a little bit.
Yeah.
So that was the one thing I got to best him in.
Was it? He wasn't really famous in, but you were walking in the shadows still of older siblings walking. My sister, even before she was Vanna White. Oh, you're Vanna's younger brother?
Oh, I already had that. That was going on in high school because he was in theater, and he was just a very popular guy. I mean, he just was. And the other thing is that there was a point where we lived in San Francisco with my maternal grandmother, and so we spent a couple of years away. And then we came back to Texas all of a sudden we were different. You know, we were California guys, and, you know, and so he landed in high school, and right away he got some notoriety because he was just different, you know. And then in theater he was already excelling as a performer, a little raw, but he could do a lot of things. He could sing, act, and dance. So when I was a freshman, he wins homecoming king. Like, that's like the biggest thing you can get, you know, like. And I'm going, oh boy, here we go again. You know, it's like, so I grew up in my sister's footsteps. I grew up in high school. It was already like that. I mean, this is even before the Fame audition, you know.
So now that everybody's older and they've cast their shadows, we've walked out of the shadows, or we're walking out of the shadows of our siblings. What do you do now? Tell me about James now.
So I had a career in the film and television industry because I went to college. I attended San Antonio College first, and then I went to UT Austin, and then, you know, got my formal education there, and then started working on movies and television and commercials, and had a pretty good career, you know, and had a lot of great experiences. And then I worked in all types of production, you know, sports, television, reality shows, feature films, you know, pretty much everything, you know. I had a taste of it all. But I always thought, wouldn't it have been great if there was an industry in San Antonio where I could have stayed here and worked here, like somebody in LA or something like that. And so we always had this idea or this dream that we could somehow manage to create an industry in San Antonio. And so we always thought, well, what would it take, you know? Well, you know, what would it take a producer such as yourself to come to San Antonio? And it would either have to be facilities, equipment, and access to a trained workforce. So, you know, long story short, we thought, well, let's create a film school or something similar to that in San Antonio that, you know, we could start generating the industry from the inside, especially now that people can be their own producers, their own directors. And so it just kind of worked out to where I got into the educational, you know, field through my work at UTSA as a producer, as a video producer. And then it just transitioned to me getting my master's in education, and then things happen. I run into an old colleague or a former professor colleague that's still there saying, hey, we need somebody to teach film classes at San Antonio College. And he's like, would you be interested? And I was like, yes, of course, you know, because the film offerings at SAC were always very minimal, like maybe a Super 8 class, you know, a lot of not so good instruction was going on there. So I always thought, man, this would be a great way to actually apply what I learned at UT Austin, because I learned from some of the really great instructors. Stephen Mims was the instructor, and he's the guy that taught Robert Rodriguez, you know, everything he knows. You know, Robert Rodriguez had just cycled through UT when I was coming around, so I already knew about him through other colleagues, and he was working on mariachi at that time. So we knew that having that, all it takes is just one good instructor or somebody to inspire you to make a difference for somebody. So I took the opportunity, and now I'm the program coordinator at San Antonio College, and we're looking to really start a film school proper. And, you know, the other thing is we understand that film school is very expensive. It's very expensive. So that kind of really only allows certain people and groups to partake in that field. It's a very difficult business to get into. You know, like my brother, he got really lucky, you know, but he was going to Cal Arts at that time, so he just took advantage of an opportunity. So we see the same thing here, and that's the way I see my students. It's like, I don't know, maybe there's a Robert Rodriguez floating out there, or there's others who they're actors, but they don't know where to start in the industry. So I'm like, well, learn the film production process. You know, as an actor, you'll know where you fit in that, and maybe you will want to write or direct or have a career as an actor. So
I've taught in North Carolina in several places not so much as a professor, but as a guest professor. And I'm always telling them, like, you never know where your career is going to go. Like, everything in my career kind of has fallen into place through somebody else. It's like a friend of mine. She goes, "Oh, you're going to go do this." I'm like, "I don't know how to do it." She goes, "Yes, you do." And okay, next thing I'm doing that. Next thing I'm doing this, and next thing I'm doing that. And I always tell me, like, you may think in your mind you want to be a director or an editor or an actor, but if you expose yourself to everything like you've done, hey, you know what? I like being behind the camera. I like this better. And when you're talking to your students, what's the one thing that in your career that they go, "Ooh, wow," like that's your impressive moment to them where they know you're serious?
I usually put it to them and say, "Hey, where's your superpower? Which superpower are you gonna develop? Are you a technical person? Because some students are just not technical, but they may be great producers. They may be organizers. They have those, I call them superpowers, but they're talents, right? And then there's some students who are really, really technical, and they love drilling down and love getting into either a camera or audio or whatever, and then they have to develop their skill. And so I always try to find where their interests are, and then just kind of, I'm more of a guide on the side than a sage on the stage.
I like that. So now to backtrack in your life again, when fame was taken off, I understand you were in the military at the time, right?
I was in the Air Force, and I had no idea what my brother was doing. I just remember that the fall before I joined the military, he was on the fence of going to Cal Arts, which is in Valencia, California. It's the Walt Disney School. Mm-hmm. And so it's the fame school of California, right? And so he gets accepted, and I don't know how he was going to pay for this, but he was on the fence, and then finally he just packed up a duffel bag and he was gone. And that was the first time he and I had been apart since since ever. I mean, he'd always been there. Oh, when he went off to college, but he was still around San Antonio because he was an Incarnate Word. But I was just like, whoa, this dude just took off, man. And I'm like, well, in 2 months, because it was like 2 months, I'm out of there too. It was my time. I had already been delayed enlistment. So it was a big change in our lives, and I didn't know what was going to happen to him. So I joined the military, and I'm actually going to Wichita Falls on my first assignment. That's my first duty station, and he's sending me mail about this thing about him being on TV, and I'm going, okay, man, what is he doing in California? What's he smoking over there? What are you doing? And I don't know the backstory. I don't know the backstory till later that, he was at Cal Arts and there was an open casting call. They said like 500 people, and it's a cattle call. They call them literally a cattle call. And so he goes and does his audition, and then he doesn't hear anything about it. And okay, nothing ventured, right? Nothing learned. So apparently they're flashing his headshot on local Southern California TV. They're looking for this guy, and it's Jessie. They're looking for him because the producers of Fame want to meet with him. They lost his contact information. So his college roommate says, "Hey, dude, they're looking for you on TV." And the way Jessie explains it, that he got really upset with his friend because he thought he was playing an awful joke. And it wasn't until another student says, "Dude, they're looking for you." And it was the producers of Fame. And I didn't know that story until I saw him again for leave. I mean, we ran into each other maybe, 6-7 months later, and he was already on the show. He was already happening. And so that was it. That was the big change. And even then, I didn't kind of get what it was. And nobody really knows those things. Yeah. I always tell people, be careful about, fame and popularity, because it's a weird thing, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure you've seen it. It is.
I always tell people, too, it's like, hey, be nice to your brother and sister, because you never know what's going to happen to them. You never know when you're going to need
So, and the connection is that first time I had some real serious leave, I had a couple of weeks to take a vacation, which that was rare. I was in the military, and what job gets you, vacation at that age, you know.
Yeah.
So I said, I'm going to go visit in LA. He's like, come on down to LA, and I'll take you to the set, and you can see what I do. And it was like the most eye-awakening experience. I mean, we got to the set. He had to be there at like 6. I'm there all day hanging out with them. They take him to the trailers. They put him in the makeup chair. They have to do these dance rehearsals because they're shooting in multiple stages, right? The dancing is happening in one area. The scene work is, the dialogue is happening in another set. And I'm just asking questions, I'm talking to the cinematographer, like, what are you doing? How do you get into this? He's like, do you do photography? And at that time, I was actually shooting pictures. The first time I ever was able to afford a camera. And I was shooting pictures, still, and I was just really getting into it. And he goes, if you're in photography, he goes, then, you're going to understand some of these basics, and you're going to have to take these classes. And, I learned this way, and, everything. I mean, I was just asking questions and the people were so nice. I mean, we're talking about people like Janet Jackson was on the set, and Nia Peoples, and just regular people, like, and I've never been a like, oh, can I get your autograph type of person. I just never been like that. And still I'm not. I mean, I was kind of like they don't want to be bothered with this. And why do I need this piece of paper with somebody's writing on it? I just never understood that. But for them, it was like a big deal,
Yeah.
And so I got to see it. And then when I left, I was like, okay, I'm out of the Air Force. I'm done with this. And, I'm going to go to college full time, and I want to study. And at that time, I had big dreams of going to NYU, and until I found out exactly how much it cost to go to NYU. And I was like, okay, I think San Antonio College isn't bad.
Yeah, that's
the rest is history. Here I am,
Yeah, I had a lot of students and parents and kids will, they'll come up and go, hey, I want to get in the business. What college should I go to for? I'm looking and go, business school. And they look at me like, what? The parents are going, yes. And the kids are like, face drops. And like, look, it's a business. It's show business.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
If you don't know the business, you can do whatever you want. And plus, you're going to spend, $400,000 at film school, and you'll get a try, but
for sure,
learn the business and go work on sets like you were saying, like you did, and then you furthered your education.
Yeah. I talk to students a lot about what my experiences were, and everybody had the PA job. Everybody had to start somewhere. Were we clueless on the first day, even though I had, my degree already? Absolutely, because what you're taught theoretically in a classroom versus how it really goes down is totally different. And so I told everybody, just temper your expectations, but be ready to work and use your brain. Don't expect that you're gonna walk in. You got a college degree. Well, let me move you right up to the front of the line. Like, no. And so having that experience, and also like I was saying, the experience of even when I graduated, it was like, okay, so I'm done now. When does the phone start ringing? Nobody had said anything to us that we were gonna have to come up with a resume and call production coordinators for the job, and I never thought it worked. You thought you'd go fill out an application, and it just doesn't work like that. So it was an eye opener, because I did spend that first year figuring out how I was going to get my first break.
Yeah, how do I get to be a PA? How do I get this to happen?
Yeah.
And what on set? Did the I don't know if they do as much now, but the C-47 joke,
of course,
it's like
the clothespin.
The clothespin. It's like, I'd love telling kids that story. Like, what?
Yeah, go bring me a stinger.
Yeah. And it's like that whole thing, and you got to learn. You got to. Too many people want to walk out and
copy that.
Yeah, and be a producer.
I always wanted to create the copy that production assistant academy, where you teach them how to say copy that.
Yeah, and the new one is, appreciate you, man. I appreciate you.
Oh, we didn't get none of that.
Yeah, that's the new PC correct movie. Appreciate you, man.
Screaming and yelling was pretty much the norm.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about your experience, kind of now that his career took off. He went from fame to Blood In, Blood Out, and actually kind of, and he's still a working actor. Mm-hmm. What's your relationship like? How does it affect you? Does that make your life easier, better, worse?
Well, I know how to manage my time with him because if you go out in public with him, it's an interesting experience because a lot of people know him, particularly here in San Antonio. But even in LA, too, some of the bigger cities, it could get pretty bad, because some people just don't know, hey, he's hanging out with his family. Should I go bug him? They still come over, and they're so nice about it. And he actually is pretty gracious. He doesn't ever say, I don't think I've ever seen him say no to somebody. He might tell them to hold on a second and meet him over here to get him away from the family or something like that. But he's always been very gracious about it. But now, speaking of the business, we think in terms of, because of the first days, it was always creative. What story do we want to tell, and what song do we want to write, and it was very more creative thinking. And now it's like, okay, well, how are we going to get this done? And so what happened is a few years ago, he was like, I want to do this production company. And this is where my sensibility stepped in. Now I'm a little more experienced. And I said, dude, in this town, you're not going to build a production company and they're just going to come. It's not going to work like that. I said, we got to infiltrate, and we got to see what. We looked at Austin and said, how is Austin doing it? And I know that nobody wants to do the comparisons between San Antonio and Austin, but they have done some things that we just have not been able to figure out. And so they were able to create the Austin studios and the Troublemaker Studios, and that, which was a deal that was made by a nonprofit and the city, some city leadership, the city providing them with the infrastructure to create this synergy or this movement of a film industry in their town. And that happened, 2006, 2007. And I knew, because I knew of the Austin Film Society, Richard Linklater, and I knew Rodriguez was already kind of doing some films there, the early Spy Kids and all that. So we just said, well, how can they do it, and why couldn't we do that? And so we created our own nonprofit with the hopes of creating either a film training program, studios, supporting independent filmmakers, because we do get a lot of people that come to and say, we want to do it, and they don't know where to start. And at least we have the knowledge to tell them, hey, this is where you should start. Write your script, break it down, find your crew, where you're going to get your equipment from, the basic stuff.
Yeah.
And so we were able to help a couple of producers. They created a documentary. There's a couple of feature films that were generated by it. So we've been able to slowly infiltrate. The big challenge is that still the city of San Antonio and the leadership has not really said, no, we want to throw this X amount of money into supporting not only studios, but the business people. Like, what can I do to incentivize you to start a production company in San Antonio and then actually create products, and that could be anything. We're talking about reality, cooking shows. I mean, anything.
Yep.
Because when you go to the cities that have industry, a film industry, you see that it's every type of programming, including the industrial producers, the commercial creators, all of that. So how do we get everybody to kind of, buy in and create that industry? So that's pretty much where we're at now. We do see a lot of movement, but I also feel that the city still needs to formalize how they're going to support the industry here. And so I'm hopeful, because I think, we are reaching at a time. Nobody knew 10 years ago where we'd be now as far as social media and content creation, which was not even a word, right? But what's the next step? And then how are we positioning ourselves to be in that, in that competition with Austin?
Yeah, it's a new market for me. I always say, I'm kind of a dinosaur, man. I want to make movies. I want to make them kind of the old-fashioned way, and the technology is changing so much that it makes it easier, but yet it makes it harder. I feel because technology is easier, but there's still a lot of bad movies being made just because you got the technology, right? Yeah. So I'm with you. I'm always trying to think of how could where I'm living make better films. And it sounds like you and Jessie are really working hard at it.
Yeah.
Before we're kind of keeping an eye on my time here because I don't want to go too long. I always kind of like to end on this question. and it may lead to something else. I'm going to end on this one until we find another one.
Okay.
What did I not ask or not cover that you really want to share?
Well, I think my personal perspective is that I'm grateful that you have, or we have a sibling, and that something I tell him is like, you have social capital that I don't. You will come into the room and people will listen to you. First, people are going to ask, who are you? Which he doesn't have to worry about. So I always try to remind him that you have this other ability and get access that I don't. So you're going to have to be the leader in some of these things, right? Now, that being said, he does know that on a certain level, I have my superpowers as well.
Right.
And so he's starting to learn how to work. We're starting to relearn how to work together from how we used to, right?
Right.
So now we're working as a team, and that, I think, I have my own perspective of things, and he has his, and so we have to learn how to sometimes work on that, particularly in storytelling. I have the type of stuff. He loves fantasy, and he loves that kind of the genres of that, and I'm more of I like to keep more simple stories.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the differences are. But I think in terms of where we're at, as far as the San Antonio industry, I think we're in a pretty good spot. I do have him on my, I put him on my advisory board because I do think he does bring in that firepower as far as some notoriety and some celebrity, and that has right away paid off dividends because the students really gravitate to him.
Right.
And he's got a young heart, young spirit. So, and I'm more of the straight-laced, straight shooter type of person. But I think they appreciate both of us. So we're anxious to see where this goes, man.
Cool. Okay, one more. Since you guys obviously work together, spend some time together, what's a story that doesn't get told a lot or has never been told, or something that between you two or about him that you might be willing to share?
God, man, I think I've put them all on the table, man. I nothing comes to mind right off the bat.
That's okay. Well, this has been awesome. I won't keep you much longer. I try not to run too long.
Thank you so much.
So that we don't get bored and the audience doesn't get bored. Yeah. Again, thank you, James.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. It's been
thank
awesome.
You so much.
And that wraps it up for today. I'd like to thank James Borrego for being here. That's an awesome story, and it's fun to learn something about his brother that I didn't know, and about San Antonio. We really appreciate you being here. If you just happen to stumble across us, or you're a follower or subscriber, I am humbly and truly grateful for that. Follow us on all of our social media outlets. Share us if you like what you saw. Let friends and family and coworkers know. And hey, if you happen to know anybody famous or be famous, and you got a relative you want us to talk with, be sure to reach out to us. And that'll do it for today's Relatively Famous.
You've been listening to Relatively Famous with Chip White. Please like and subscribe to Relatively Famous with Chip White.